Welcome to another edition of the Petty Podcast. This is your host, Stephen Petty. I've had many requests to do a podcast looking at the harms masks have done to children, and this is going to be the first of those. I'm going to focus primarily on the impacts we're seeing on development of children and also on children's ability to learn. One of the studies I'm going to cite here, and the URL for it is listed across the bottom, is a study by Curriculum Associates, Understanding Student Learning, that published in November of 2021. And these are the findings. We're going to touch on those at length. But basically, they found deficits in reading and mathematics, and that those deficits were worse in terms of meeting grade level for minority students. So how did the study come about? What they did was they looked at over 6 million students in both in categories of reading and mathematics. And you can see here how they've taken those populations and reduced them in terms of demographics. Here's the first plot, and at first it looks kind of busy, but what you have here is this is reading results, grades 1 through 8. Across the bottom, you'll see the grades 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The gray bars are historic norms in terms of grade level reading, and the red bars, downward bars, are values for 2021. And what you see is, on average, students are reading 0 to 9% below historic grade levels. With the exception of the data for 8th grade, all the levels show deficits. Similarly for mathematics, grades 1 through 8, you can see the data here. A little more pronounced. On average, students are 4 to 10% below their historic grade level mastery of their topic, in this case math. This is a different cross-section of that data. Again, grades composite of grades 1 through 8, but looking at schools that have greater than 50% black students, greater than 50% Latino, or greater than 50% white. And you can see that both in reading and in mathematics that the Latino and black majority schools are suffering worse consequences in terms of performance below grade level. In fact, for white majority schools, it's around 6% for both reading and mathematics, whereas for minority students, it's on the reading side 10 to 11% deficits, and on the math side 14 to 17% deficits. The study also looked at not only just 2021 data, but they went back and compared it to 2020 data and 2021 data, and this is data for reading. And while the data jump around a little bit, you can see that the deficits are pretty much the same since the pandemic began by grade level. They do jump around a little bit. Similarly, for the same sort of data for mathematics, a little more pronounced deficits. It looks like in the early years they were stronger deficits in 2020 versus 2021, and in the later years, it looks like 2021 deficits are stronger. I might add that on the developmental side, Brown University did a big study where they looked at they looked at children born either before the pandemic and traced their development, or children born at or during the pandemic. And the big overall bottom line is that the development scores have dropped by 23% in 2 years since 2018. What was their overall conclusion in their abstract? we find that children born during the pandemic have significantly reduced verbal, motor, and overall cognitive performance compared to children born pre-pandemic. Moreover, we find that males and children in lower economic, socioeconomic families have been most impacted. Here's some of the data. This is early learning composite. This is from children when they're first born, then counting years forward. And they started the data here in about 2010, and you can see since the pandemic, children born since the pandemic, their overall score of early learning is dropping like a rock. You can read the paper on what all the parameters are, but you can see that there's a significant fall off in terms of early learning. Similarly, when they do studies on both the verbal and nonverbal development, and again, you can look at the paper for the components that they're measuring, which is across the bottom, you'll see similar fall-offs, particularly in 2021. You really start to see the kids struggle with respect to development. And then we have the England Department of Education study that just came out in January as well. And one of the things they did in the paper was look at the impact of masking. And a couple of things that they had to say were that when they surveyed the teachers, 94% thought wearing face coverings has made communication between teachers and students more difficult, 59% saying it made it a lot more difficult. Well, clearly communication is critical to teaching and learning, so that's not good. And then, of course, we're going to talk more about this at length, but they've also observed physical side effects as well as verbal and nonverbal communication issues between teacher and the student. One of the huge studies that's out there is this Kizlinski study that looked at masking effects not only just on children but adults as well. And what they did was it's a meta-study, so they looked at 1,226 studies, and they reduced it down to 109 that had qualitative data and 44 that had quantitative data. And these were the 25 or so effects. You can see that on the lower left of the pediatric effects that they've actually measured and seen. But these are the sorts of effects that they're seeing. I won't go into them in detail. You can go into them in the paper. We will touch it on further podcasts, but there's a lot of things, both physical and emotional, coming out. More to come on this, but here's a little sneak preview on mental health side. The BBC over in England is saying that the referrals for children and young people to mental health services in the severe cases has increased dramatically. And you can see the plot of those referred cases from about 2017 forward to late 2021. And you can see there's a dramatic rise in towards the end of 2020. So we are having this whole pandemic, lockdown, masking, et cetera, is having a big impact on our young people. So do we really want to put masks, and now they're talking about N95s on children? No, heck no, we don't want to do that. There's one, they don't work, and two, they have lots of negative impacts. I touched on some of these references today in the podcast. There's a limited amount of time to cover a lot of material. Here's some materials where I've listed the topic of the paper and a URL if you want to go out and look at these independently. Here's 2 pages of them, and here's another page, a little over a page. Appreciate you watching the podcast. We'll do a couple more on children and masks and health effects coming up. Appreciate you watching the podcast. Have a great day.